Now, the problem is with the magnetic motors, David, the issue I have with that, and maybe you can help me with this, is that you might get the voltage, but you don't get the amps, and it's the amps that you want. So do you know what way you looked at to try and get over this?
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum, and the media overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the Grand Solar Minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
And of course, we got talking about that earlier, myself and David, and all of a sudden, I started talking about the Tesla switch because the idea of free energy is, to some people, it's a bit of a mystery and there's no such thing, but we know there is. And one of the things myself and Steve talked about in the past, using a flip-flop circuit in having two batteries. And basically, when one battery is charged, the other battery is charging, the other battery is being used, and when that used battery is finished, it flips over and the other battery is being used, and this cycle goes on for an electric car. But the problem is that the charge rate of one battery is going to be slower than the usage rate of the other. And unless the charge rate is the same as the usage or faster, it doesn't make sense, it's not going to work. So this was the kind of dilemma that we had. I was thinking about, how can we sort this? And then we got talking to a guy that myself and Steve know called Andrew. And Andrew happened to say to me, you should look up a thing called the Tesla switch. And basically what the Tesla switch does is it charges the battery while you're using the battery at the same time. It charges other batteries. And so when you're in school, in your science class, your science teacher will tell you that if you have a bulb attached to a battery, when the battery goes down, the bulb will not work anymore because you've used all the power in the battery. And that's what they tell you in the classroom. But that's BS, because Tesla came up with a thing called the Tesla switch. And basically the Tesla switch, you can be using the battery and charging another set of batteries at the same time. So you have two sets of batteries. One set of batteries is set up in parallel and the other one is set up in serial. And while you're using a load like a light bulb, you're charging the other set as well. And when the serial batteries are wasted, you switch over and the whole process starts again. And there's one company that have been doing this. They tested it for 3 years. So I was saying to David that it's something that I want to do. I want to get 18650 batteries which are rechargeable and set this experiment up to test it, see whether it works. Because if it does and you can employ a relay circuit into it, basically you have charged batteries. You won't lose energy. When your batteries run down, well, they never run down because they'll be charging each other. So from a self-sufficiency point of view, it's so beneficial. So that's an experiment that's going to be on my list to do. But at the time, we had a lot of issues on Skype with interference when we were talking about that. So obviously, we're not getting it at the moment, so that's good. For people, if you want to check out self-sufficiency, if you want to check out that experiment, it's called the Tesla switch, and Nikola Tesla actually put this together. It's not me. It was just something that we were told. I checked into it and I thought, actually, this is plausible. And if you go to YouTube, you'll find a lot of people talking about this. So along with David's magnetic motor idea, using the magnetic energy to produce current. Now, the problem is with the magnetic motors, David, the issue I have with that, and maybe you can help me with this, is that you might get the voltage, but you don't get the amps. And it's the amps that you want. So do you know what way you looked at to try and get over this? because I know that, getting the voltage is the easy part, is getting the amps is the hard part, and that's where the power comes from. But there was a guy, I don't know whether you know, but there's a free energy consortium globally in the world, and there was a Japanese inventor who created one of these magnetic motors. And they couldn't believe, they said, no, you're actually going against the law of physics. He said, I'm not, he said, because at the end of the day, I've produced this motor and I've sold 40,000 of them. I seen a short video of it years ago, and so the Free Energy Consortium flew over to him because they didn't believe him, and he showed them the magnetic motor, and he showed them, the laws of physics say you can't get more out than what you put in. But he was showing them, and they couldn't believe it. They were scratching their head going, what are you doing? So he's saying, well, obviously I don't know what he did. I couldn't tell you what he did. But whatever he was doing, he was applying physics in some strange way, and it was working. So obviously there are people doing it, and there's more and more people coming out with water, the cars that run on water, motorbikes that run on water. I think the floodgates have opened. Gone are the days where Stanley Meyer with his H2O car, where he was poisoned, he was food poisoned. They brought him out and they poisoned his food in the early 80s, late 70s. Gone are them days, because I think there's so many people now that have access to the internet. There's so many people building stuff. They can't stop the floodgates from opening. I think now's the time to do it.
And speaking of cycles, my new book with my co-author Bill Porter, Climate Revolution, a must-read for understanding our sun-driven climate. As we progress deeper into this new Eddy Grand Solar Minimum, weather extremes leading to global food scarcity and higher food prices are here now. This book describes the expected changes, how to survive and thrive during future challenging times, and also practical preparations. The entire book is interactive with over 250 links, so you can click and go out to the scientific aspect of what we're talking about with the repeating cycles in this Grand Solar Minimum. The science is explained so you understand the mechanisms. The solutions are there because we know we're going to face these exact same problems again that were faced in the Maunder Minimum, the Sporer Minimum, the Wolf Minimum. Find designs for building greenhouses, grow guides, beam soil techniques, as well as bioreactors to create your own growth hormones for the soil. Available now, the new Adapt 2030 Climate Revolution. The link's in the description box below.
Yeah, that's true, because you mentioned Japan, but there's another firm up in Korea that has gone on, and they started to crowdfund a new type of device as well. It's based on the Parendev design, but they took it a step further, and it's enclosed in a box, so you can't see exactly how they'd set it up. But if anybody out there wants to take a look at what we're trying to do and accomplish as well here with this, it's a coupled grow system. It's called Parendev, P-E-R, pear, like a pear, but it's not a pear, P-E-R-E-N-D-E-V. And you can find all types of working models across YouTube. There's all kind of schematics across the net. They've done CAD drawings. So you can really get into the nuts and bolts of how the batteries are spaced, 1814, how everything's angled to get it to push off at the right angular momentum inside the magnets, because if you put them vertical, they're not going to spin off each other. There's just so much information out there that I'm surprised more people aren't building this at like science fairs when they're kids in high school. I mean, if you have a decent machine shop and you have some magnets that you can order online, you could get something to spin for sure. Can you get that crankshaft to then bring something into an alternator, then push it out in a usable form of electricity? Yeah, that takes a little more work in the end there. But there is so much information out, and I'm really surprised that more of these motors aren't being built into mass production. Or you think some of these companies out there with billions of dollars for research labs would have at least put something together. It's a small unit, could power a house. This is the whole thing. What they're doing in Korea, the thing was putting out like 10 kilowatts out of a little small box, and it was mobile.
That would be ideal for any house. But here's the thing, we know that they have the free energy devices to roll out, and people ask for the free energy devices, but you have to think about it. And this is coming from speaking to Thomas from Truth, Honor, Integrity and the Foundation. Somebody brought out a free energy device that you could bolt onto your house, and then you wouldn't need the electricity board or the electricity company. Then all these people would be made redundant, and it would create mass unemployment. And so what the Foundation are kind of saying is that, yes, we'll roll out the technology, but it has to be done in a way where the people don't lose their jobs, because there's families there involved and there's mortgages involved and everything else. And that wouldn't be right to do that. It would be irresponsible to do that. So what you do is, when you start setting up the company to roll these devices out, you hire the people that work for the electricity company and bring them on board with the new company, and then gradually build up the new company to do it. And that way, you're creating the same employment and you're bringing people on and they're not losing their jobs. And that's the best way to do it.
You know, and I would say from the beginning, they should have been, instead of stringing up the entire world with copper cabling above our heads and below our feet, they should have started off with these things so we never would have had to overcome this problem, where we could have just set this in place and then we could have moved on our economy 100 years ago. Because you have to realize these parent dev motors and the Tesla patents you're talking about, they're more than 100 years old.
Oh, yeah. I mean, with this technology, we've had this technology for years. And we know about Tesla wanting to give free energy to the world with the tower that he was building, and then JP Morgan pulled the plug when they realized that he wanted to give it away for free. So, I mean, most people know the history of Tesla and the whole thing. So it was pure greed. That's it. It was pure greed on the powers that be. They wanted to charge people for the energy and then give it away free. And yeah, we have copper cables everywhere. Tesla was demonstrating free energy on the White House lawn in 1902. So we've had electric cars since the 1800s.
1880s, yeah.
Exactly.
Those electric cars in the 1880s, can you believe that? And look at we've almost made no progress. We've actually gone back in progress. 1880 is when they had their first electric cars, and now we're 140 years later, and we're still barely getting it together.
That's it. Apparently we can send rockets to the moon and satellites out to outer space, but just can't get past that 140-year-old combustion engine. We just can't get rid of that for some reason. I wonder it's got to do with the petroleum companies and the oil companies. But then that's a story in itself, the whole idea of the prohibition in the early 1920s in America, because people were beginning... they realized that the petrol was expensive, so they start bootlegging the alcohol, because they knew they could use pure alcohol in the cars. So there's a great documentary out there called Who Killed the Electric Car? It's on YouTube. And they said that the oil companies were behind the prohibition to stop people making alcohol to fuel their cars, and they did it for that period of time until it got into people's minds, into the psyche, that they had to pay money for petrol. And then once people kind of got used to doing that and accustomed to buying petrol for their car, the prohibition ended. So if you haven't seen it, it's a great documentary for everybody to watch. It's on YouTube. It's called Who Killed the Electric Car? And even GM turned around and they produced electric cars, and they stopped them. They leased them out to people, and a couple of Hollywood stars took the lease and used the car, and GM said, right, we need to get the cars back, and they offered to buy the car off them, and GM said no, took the cars back and crushed them. And they said, why did you do that? The cars were brilliant. And GM said, no money in it at all. The aftermarket parts and the maintenance for the cars was so small, they wouldn't make money on it, so they crushed the cars. So, if that answers the question of why we're still using petrol-based cars, combustion engine, is because it's all about the money. They've had this technology for years.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
Yeah, Alan, can I drop a point in there for you? Over Christmas, I went to Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, and I visited the Nikola Tesla Museum there. And in the back section, they have the Nikola Tesla Laboratory. And inside there are no less than 15 working models of what you're describing. Like, they're actually working models of all these electromagnetic devices running off the Earth's magnetic field to power these devices. And television programs go there to film, but the amount of devices that are up, working, and running is shocking. That there are really that many that were developed off his patents and put into play in that laboratory for you to actually look at. My girlfriend and myself, we just stood there shaking our heads for I don't know how long, like, I can't believe that this is not out on the market. And once she saw it, because I had described that to her the whole time, like, hey, we're going to go see all these free devices, free energy devices. She's like, yeah, whatever, yeah. But after she left, after seeing it, it was a completely different. It was a whole layer of reality disappeared within a minute or two of getting into that place. It was quite interesting to see the reaction of somebody who didn't believe in free power to actually see it in front of you to go, what? This thing is real. I cannot believe it. Like that quickly. It was a shocker. So if you're in Zagreb and if you're in Croatia, please make sure you get down to that Nikola Tesla Museum. Because if you're a fan of old combustion motors and giant torquey machines and everything from the 1860s forward with steam engines and even some stuff back into the early 1800s, that place is for you. Plus all the magnetic motors inside that Tesla lab will shock you. And I got to get into the Faraday cage there too, and they fired that thing up.
And what about, have nobody took a video in the museum and put it on YouTube to show, to say, look what's in this museum?
Yeah, I did. I was in the Faraday cage, and I was filming from inside the Faraday cage when they fired up that Tesla coil and got the big sparks coming across to the Faraday cage.
Okay, and do you have that video online?
It is, yeah. I'll have to dig it up and see what the URL is. I'll see if I'll be able to share it here with you. In an introduction, when I was up, we were talking about the ridiculousness of the AOC trying to talk about all renewables in America, and I was saying, wait a second, I'm over here at the Nikola Tesla Laboratory, and we got all this free power, and you guys are talking about stringing everything up with windmills and solar panels, which are going to decrease in output anyway due to the decreasing total solar irradiance from the sun going into a grand solar minimum, and yet you don't even want to talk about. So I said, hey, AOC, if you start talking about this, I will give you some support behind the channel. I don't agree with your politics because we are like miles apart on what you believe. I don't believe in socialism, communism, never have, don't want to see it. Lived in China enough to know that that's never going to work. To talk about, to getting some real solutions in our country, I would be behind that. That's for sure. But nope, not a peep. It's got to be wind, got to be solar, can't be anything else. And that's what irked me, and that's why I did the video. So, yes, let me get the link for you.
Yeah, send us off the link. And, again, it goes to what Tesla did with the batteries and the Tesla switch, because we know that solar panels are not really, they'll do for the time being, but as you said, with the Grand Solar Minimum plus the degradation of the panel over time, you're going to get less and less power issues with the panels, as well as latency in the technology with the cabling and everything else. You're going to lose certain power with that as well. That has to be an alternative, and the magnetic motors have to be an alternative going forward. But we also need to talk about self-sufficiency. Let's talk about the growing of the food, because, I think our generation, David, are the generation after us, the millennials, are going to be struggling because they really, really have no skills and no interest, in the majority of them, in learning how to survive or survival or what to do or know what to do. If an EMP happened, they'd be completely lost. Where do tomatoes come from? Oh, Tesco's. No, they come from the ground. I know that's simplistic, but you would sometimes get an answer like that from some kids because they just don't know about how things are produced and where they come from. And it's frightening. So we are the last generation to have some knowledge of how to do things.
True, and you have to make it more of a social thing where people want to get together and start to share these skills that they have and try to experiment together. And, I wouldn't say make it like a barn raising, but here in Asia there's community gardens, and that's what people do on the weekends. They go down and they make an event out of it where it's super fun to go down there. It's a community event. Bring the children down, bring the, people are looking for, dating and whatever, is go down, have some coffee and work in the garden, and they make it as a such thing. haven't really seen much of that going on in the States, where it becomes a social event as well as a skills building type of thing. But that's what I think we need to move it into, because you mentioned all these people, 75,000 people going to see a Metallica concert. Well, they're there for entertainment, not education. But I think we have to mix this together somehow to really start to get some momentum forward, is create a space that's incredibly fun, interactive, and a community type of thing where you can meet new like-minded people and then come at it from, hey, we need to get this community together and start sharing. But when I say community, I don't mean this like kumbaya, communist type of one loaf of bread for you, one loaf of bread for me. That doesn't work. I'm talking about everybody building on the skills they already have to make a collective whole.
Exactly. And what about safety and security is important as well. As I said earlier, John Irwin said, it's not the government or the police, it's your next door neighbour. So that also has to be considered. People need to be aware that if your next door neighbour, if something happens, and we're well overdue for a CME or a Carrington effect from 1859, we're well overdue for one of them. And if we do have a CME or an EMP and it happens, we could be down for months. And we need to be able to manage. And if people know you have food or backup and they don't have it, they will kick down your door and kill you for it. So it's important that people need to have some kind of plan should that happen.
That's true, and that's the reason I do my channel, is I understand that exact same thing, and the more message that's out there to try to get more people prepared and get ready for this idea. And also, I want to explain with the CME, and like the whole planet's not going to go down at the same time.
No.
Well, whatever part of the planet is sun-facing at the time that energetic event hits will go down. But it depends on what the duration is. Is it a 2-hour event, a 4-hour event, an 8-hour event, and how our world's spinning as to which power grid goes down. But when you're down, instead of coming and fighting for the food, if we were all prepared or even more prepared, we're able to it's like an instant action plan to get together and start getting into this mitigation or these kind of emergency measures. Because I live in an earthquake and a typhoon zone. And when you know these typhoons are coming, everybody goes into action. It's kind of like they've already been pre-programmed. They know what to do, what to go buy. So there's no massive running to the stores and people gouging each other with cans. Everybody's very contained. Everybody's got emergency supplies in their house just because you're in an earthquake zone. They're also with the typhoon, so everybody knows these things happen, and it's not a matter of if, but when. So at least the basic of the basics of having enough food for at least 2 weeks and water in your house, that's the bare minimum everybody, at least in Taiwan, has. They just understand it. So this is the kind of premise we need marching forward, is these events are here with the food growing, and if you look at the crop production this year, it's going to be dismal. And that's a nice word for it. But people understand that, okay, dismal planting this year, food prices up, economy's going to shrink, economy's going to get rediverted into other sectors, great. But what can we do so then next year, when the food planting is going to be even less than this year, all right, now we need to start getting ready. Like, what skills do you have? And it's not about just growing the food, too. That's the misnomer. We're going to have to store the food. We're going to have to process the food to get it ready to store it. And what kind of skill sets do people have of drying something or making a solar dryer out of nothing? I mean, you talked about nobody being ready. You can grow these tomatoes, you can grow the lettuce, you can grow the fruit. Then what? You can only eat so much of it before it starts to go rotten unless you know how to prepare it. And again, that facet of learning together and getting out as a community, and a bunch of hands doing this is going to be way easier than myself sitting there and cutting like 2 tons of apples. So it's a community thing.
Yeah, and I think that's what has to be done. I think people need to get together for protection as well as helping each other. We need to go back to community. Now, over in America, this climate change, what's happening? Why are they having so many all at one time?
Well, the peer-reviewed research is out there. I mean, you just have to look in the right place, and the media is not even looking or even asking the questions as to where to look. Because myself and the whole crew that's involved in the Grand Solar Minimum is saying, hey, you got to look at the cosmic rays because they're exciting the silica-rich magma chambers across the planet. And as we march forward with way more cosmic rays than we're getting now, you can expect these volcanoes to start popping off at much more, more ferocious eruptions than we're getting at the moment. Because they just had, 3 VEI 3 pluses all together, different locations around the world. The ash clouds going up, between 45 to 70,000 feet off these 3 volcanoes. There was one in Russia, one down in Indonesia, and then the one over in Mexico. But they were all VEI 3 plus. Now we're starting to get up to the 4s now. When we get up to the 7s, that's the end of global agriculture. And every single Grand Solar Minimum, there's at least one VEI 7. Now, is it stepping down into the Grand Solar Minimum? Is it at the bottom? Or is it coming out of it? As you looked at the time series, there's nothing that we really know as we can pinpoint it. It's so all over the place as to coming in, bottom, or going out. So we know what happens, but it's just really hard to forecast when it's going to happen on the timeline of this intensification or let up of the Grand Solar Minimum. But it's going to happen. So, if you hear of a VEI 7, you're going to have to stop what you're doing at that moment and just stop what you're doing because it's an emergency situation. Your house might not be covered in ash, but the global delivery system is going to have a very difficult time operating because there's going to be such a mad rush to get all the food. So my contention was this, and I want to clarify this as to why I would say stop what you're doing, get as much money out of the bank as you can, and go rush and buy as much food as you can. Now, just to clarify, that is selfish, and I understand that. The reason I would say that is because none of the governments across the planet are warning us or telling us to work together to get ready for this, so you are absolutely on your own. If we were coming at it from a different direction and every government was on board and we were seeing it in the newspapers and the magazines and on the radio and they were all talking about working together cohesively, but I'm in the complete opposite now. There is no information forthcoming for us to get ready for this, so you're definitely on your own. And that'll be a thing of talk shows, and then once people get it, they're going to understand it. And at that point, it's going to be way too late for you to get everything.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.